Good morning. Hopefully, I guess depending on where you're at. Welcome to everybody to our Guava webinar today. Mobile Device Communication, Compliance, and Archiving. My name is Sheldon Mills. I'm a marketing manager here at Guava, and I'm here with Q Mangus. He is the director of product marketing here at Guava. Just want to start off by thanking everyone attending the webinar today and hope you benefit from all the information we have here to present. Couple quick announcements. Maybe you've heard or not, Guava was recently awarded the Best Overall Value and Champion for Content and Email Archiving from Infotech, the Infotech Research Group, which is awesome, but I'm not going to go into detail. I think you might mention it more later on. Second, we have launched our new website, new, revamped, and has a lot more resources, powerful, easier to use. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out, just guava.com. And lastly, we are going to be changing our webinar formats coming shortly. We're planning to have more of an interview-style webinar. We'll be doing live video broadcasts. We'll have more subject matter experts, and fingers crossed will be a little more entertaining and engaging. But today we're going to have a Q&A session addressing the most important, or I guess the most frequent questions we receive regarding mobile archiving, best practices, and retain. I'll be fielding the questions, and Q will be answering them. For those of you who joined a little bit late, Q is the Director of Product Marketing here at Guava. We have a number of questions we're going to get through, frequent questions we get. However, if you have any questions, those are the most important ones for this webinar, so please put them through in the Q&A panel or the chat panel, and Q will be sure to address those. And you do that just by clicking on the chat or QA icon, and you can type those in. Q?
Yeah, welcome everyone. We're really excited to talk to you about mobile archiving and some of the reasons why you should be archiving mobile. And as Sheldon said, there's a lot of great questions that have been submitted. These are questions that we've had as we go to events and just generally when talking to people. So we're going to make sure that we cover those. And as Sheldon said, if you have questions, please put those through, and we'll answer them as we go through. But yeah, we're excited for this. Hope you benefit from what we're going to discuss.
Awesome. Well, with that, let's just jump right into it. So the first, I guess, frequently asked question we get about mobile archiving is, why do I need to archive mobile communication, and kind of what are the reasons to do that?
Perfect. So the slide, I'm going to use a few slides for this webinar, just because it's going to kind of help facilitate some of the things that I'm going to be discussing. And that's kind of why I'm using a slide deck that we've used before, which is the kind of a separate webinar that we have, which is the top 5 reasons to archive mobile. But as I was looking through those questions, I realized that this kind of applies really well to what some of these questions that we're going to go over hit. So let's just hit a few reasons why you should be archiving mobile. That was the question, right? Why do you need to archive mobile, and what are some of the reasons? There are 5 reasons that we've really identified, and I'm going to just hit these really quickly to kind of hopefully answer that question. So here's an overview of the top 5 reasons. You know, there's an increase in mobile device data, and I'll kind of show some of that. We know that people are using mobile phones more and more, right? They're using that as kind of their preferred method. But that can also lead to employee misuse, which can lead to data leakage. And then, of course, there's regulation, compliance, and policy enforcement. Those are your main top 5 reasons to do so. And I'm going to hit on these as we go through this webinar to answer some of the questions. But let's hit a little bit on some things that we've seen and some research that has been done on the growth in mobile data usage. And so that'll kind of hopefully answer that question. So really between 2012 and 2016, it's estimated there will be a 13-fold global traffic increase in mobile usage. So think about that. You know, that's a huge increase. And then there's recently been about an 81%, or we've seen a big growth in smartphone usage data. 81% actually in the past couple of years, and an increase in mobile data traffic of 70%. Just some things to realize, and this is probably obvious to everyone on this call that yes, there is growth in mobile data usage. People are using data more and more, and of course that is something that is happening in the workplace more and more often. Here's just another interesting stat that one of the most recent pieces of information we have is that this was a couple years ago, but in 2011, 7.8 trillion texts were sent worldwide. That's about 250,000 per second. And then, of course, more information about smartphone sales, and then what we spend our time on every day on our usage. But the fact remains that probably the biggest reason why and some of the concerns with archiving mobile is the fact that the reason why you should be archiving is, number one, your employees are using it at work. We've seen this increase in mobile device usage, as I was talking about, and your employees are going to be using these devices at work. So your biggest reason is that there's an increase in usage. Here's something else that's interesting as well, is that we know that their employees are bringing their own devices, and we'll talk about that as well. But this is something here that I really like, is that by 2016 they estimate there will be 1.62 billion mobile devices in the workplace. So think about what that can mean to your organization as people are bringing those devices in, and the kind of threats that you could face. So number one is the increased usage. Number two are the threats, would be the reason. So there's also trends of wearable devices, smartwatches, fitness bands. Those are some threats that you need to be thinking about as well. So I know that this is a long answer to the question, but I think it's a loaded question. So I'm going to keep going here. Here's some other risks that you have. So this is interesting, and some stats that we found is that 1 in 3 people keep sensitive work info on their mobile device. 2 out of 3 employees are not aware of policies that companies may have regarding mobile device usage, and 95% of companies don't have mobile security policies. And then there's this stat of 63% personal use of a work-issued device. So even if you are giving your employees a work-issued device, they're using it for personal use. So what does this mean? What does all this stuff mean? It is that you need to have oversight of mobile communication. So once again, going back to the question that was asked, is why do we need to archive mobile? It's the increased usage, the risks that are associated with it, like sharing sensitive data, using a personal device at work, and maybe mixing that personal and corporate, and then also using a corporate device for personal use. And finally, the last reason why is because of regulations. They actually state that specifically for financial. I know we talked a lot about when we pushed this out that this would be for financial. We do have financial organizations on this call here, and others as well. So I'm going to hit on all of that. But for financial, it's really big because FINRA, SEC, FSA, and even Sarbanes-Oxley and the Dodd-Frank Act all really state that mobile communications are subject to the same kind of guidelines that other electronic communication would be. So you need to be able to archive that and have oversight of what is being said so that you can go back and comply with regulations and ensure that your employees are acting appropriately.
Got it. I see. That brings up two other questions that we commonly get asked with these regulations. You have a whole bunch of them up here. I wonder if we often get asked a little more detail about what regulations could affect what and how my organization archives. And then more specifically, you went over a list of it's a huge amount of mobile data. What data should I be archiving? What mobile data should I be archiving?
Good. That's really good. So to build on the regulations, so here's a few that we see. So I did touch a little bit on specifically the financial organizations. So FINRA, is an oversight body, right? And they specify that you need to have oversight of mobile communication, and specifically you need to be able to ensure that that your employees, this is for financial specifically, that your employees aren't communicating, insider information or giving stock advice, in a form that could be viewed as official communication from your company via mobile devices. So that's something you really need to be careful about. And I know that as we've talked to organizations that are governed by FINRA, that we've heard many stories of people, out using their smartphone, using a BlackBerry, and they casually are communicating with somebody, and they state something. They state, "Oh, this stock looks great," and they may not have even been thinking that was something. Maybe not even been thinking about it, and now they have shared something that they shouldn't have. And so the idea with archiving mobile is that now you're complying with the FINRA regulations, and you have that oversight. And it's similar with SEC guidelines, and then with the Dodd-Frank Act. Now, the Dodd-Frank Act is one in particular that's really interesting. And the idea there with Dodd-Frank, and one thing that we all need to remember and be concerned about, is that with the Dodd-Frank Act, at any given moment, you could be involved in an audit, a financial audit, or not a financial audit, but an audit in general of what your organization is doing. And the Dodd-Frank Act states that if you're involved in an audit, you have 72 hours to produce all of the communication that, especially the mobile communication, in regards to that audit. And so if you don't have an archive, how are you going to get to that, right? How are you going to produce that in 72 hours? You're going to go to everybody's phone and, okay, turn in your phones. Here's a box. Let's go through and try and get that. I mean, that does not sound feasible, right? It sounds actually a little insane. And so it's important to have an archive, because with the proper archive, and of course we'll talk about how Retain does it, but with the proper archive, you can now get to those communications, those mobile communications, from one central archive and produce them within those 72 hours. Actually, maybe much quicker when it comes to Retain. And then for other organizations, there's HIPAA and HITECH. That's for healthcare and healthcare specifically, and that really has to do with the fact that you can't, if you're in healthcare, you can't be sharing personal health information, or PHI. You can't be sharing that information because that's personal. that's against these laws. You need to keep that personal stuff personal and not let that get out. And so HIPAA and HITECH really outline that you need to have that oversight and make sure that your employees aren't pushing that out. By having an archive, you can prove whether or not employees have done that. And so there's others as well, like the Freedom of Information Act that applies to government and sunshine laws. Really, but what the point is that these regulations really specify that you need to be archiving electronic communication. You need to be able to quickly produce them. And they talk about all electronic communication, but mobile communication falls under that umbrella. And then to build on that, the question, as Sheldon discussed, is what type of data should I archive? And so kind of going along with the regulations, first I'll talk about what type you should to comply with regulations, then I'll just hit on in general. So to comply with regulations, you need to archive any phone call logs, any text messaging or mobile or multimedia messaging. That is the basic need for what should be out there, because that's how your employees are communicating on mobile devices. To build on that a little bit, employees can communicate via social media or even email using their mobile phones. That's something that you should be archiving as well. That falls under the electronic communication. So specifically mobile communications, that's text messages, multimedia communications, and phone call logs. However, employees can also use their mobile phones to do instant messaging and social media and email. You should also have the ability to archive those communications, and I'll talk a little bit about how Retain does that. So what you should be archiving, mobile specifically, once again, is text messages, multimedia messages, and phone call logs. And that is to comply at minimum with these regulations. However, you should also be archiving those kind of communication to have oversight, just in general, for your own benefit as a company, to be able to know what your employees are saying, how they're saying it, and know how your employees are communicating, and that can really help you plan for what you need mobile device-wise. It can help you understand the health of your company, how your employees' morale is. There's many reasons why you should have an archive apart from just the regulations, and the mobile piece is essential to that.
Awesome. That's a good explanation of kind of the what and why of mobile archiving, and we're going to get into the how here in a bit. So I have a lot of questions about that. Before that, we get this question a lot. What should we do about BYOD? There's a lot of, it's very common for bring your own devices, and if you have any best practices there.
Great. So the first thing I will suggest on that, and I think I might, right here, that's probably the next slide. Okay, so the first thing I would suggest is that you have policies. You need a mobile device policy. This policy needs to outline what is appropriate and what is not appropriate when it comes to mobile devices. And this should apply, this policy needs to be clear, and it needs to state if you allow BYOD and how it works with BYOD, and then how it works with corporate issued devices. So if you as a company want to only do corporate issued devices, then your policy needs to clearly state that, and state that bringing your own device to work and using it for work purposes is not acceptable. Your policy needs to state that. And so that would mean that your employees can't be using their personal device to access your corporate email, to access corporate instant messaging, to communicate with to communicate with your customers or employees at all. That's one route to go, and that could be a solution for you. I don't know. That it all depends on your company, but your policy needs to outline that. And then, of course, you must train people on the policy. So let's go down the road of BYOD. If you decide that you want to allow your employees to bring their own device, your policy needs to state what they can and cannot do with their own device. And so, you can allow your customers to bring in their device, allow them to access your corporate email, allow them to text your customers, but you need to make sure the policy outlines what can and cannot be said. So when it comes to financial specifically, you need to make sure that if they're communicating with mobile devices about your company, that they don't state things that they wouldn't state in other official communication. It's easy for them to think that a text is casual, but they need to realize, and your policy needs to state that if they're using their mobile device in an official capacity to communicate with customers, that they need to fulfill those policies and still be within the guidelines that FINRA and the SEC has stated on what they can and cannot be saying to your customers. So with BYOD, once again, the first thing I would say when it comes to any mobile communication is have a policy. And with BYOD, make sure that policy is clear and that everyone is trained on what that policy states. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is to make sure you have technology that validates that policy or enforces that policy. So let's take, for example, let's go down, since the question was asked about BYOD, there's a couple of ways to do this. One way, and this is with retain, would be to archive everything. Archive personal, archive all communication, personal and business communication. And that may be a solution for you, and you'd have to make sure that that's outlined in the policy. Or another solution, it would be to have a separate persona for business communication. And so specifically with Retain, we've partnered with a company called CellTrust. And actually I'm going to go over a couple of ways you can do this. But the first way is we've partnered with a company called CellTrust, and they provide an app where it separates and assigns a separate mobile business number to that phone. So now there's a phone number that's a personal number, and your employees use that for their personal communication, and there's a separate phone number for business communication. And employees can use that number to call. They can use that number to text, and those communications are, full oversight of those. They're encrypted, and they're archived. So now you have the ability to let your employees bring their own device to work. They can use that on the network and using corporate email and whatnot, and they can also use it for official communication. But what they do is use that separate persona. So that's one way to do it, and that's with the CellTrust app. And so, and what's great with that is that the people that are communicating on the other side don't need to have that app installed. They don't need to. It would come across as a regular text message. And then internal users, so if you're communicating between two CellTrust users, they're going to get the messages and they're going to be fully encrypted. And once again, that will all come through the CellTrust app. But if they're going to external users, that's going to all be done through and will look like a regular text message or a regular phone call outside. There is another thing that could be a viable solution for everyone on this call when it comes to BYOD, and that is with Bbm Protected or BlackBerry Messenger Protected. That gives your employees the ability to communicate using that app, and it's all encrypted, and then we also archive that as well. And now one thing with that is that both sides that are communicating there both have to have the app. So that would be a good thing for your internal communication. If you don't have the need of having your employees contact customers directly outside, they could use BBM Protected for internal communication, and that kind of gives them a separate way of communicating apart from the internal or built-in SMS. So to reiterate, the idea is to have policies and have technologies that validate that policy. And so the ways you can have the technology is, one, to archive all communication, personal and business, and that would be done via Retain Mobile, and I'll hit more on what that is, I'm pretty sure, later in this call. And then, or you can separate those and have different personas and archive that as well.
Great. Well, let's jump into it. You talked a little bit about the CellTrust app. I wonder if you could talk kind of generally of how does the mobile archiving work with Retain? How can, it's partly why a lot of people are on this call and people come to us. It's like, well, what do you have that will help us with mobile archiving, and how does it work?
Great. Perfect. Great question. Let me skip there. So the mobile piece in particular with Retain. So Retain is a product in general. We call it Retain Unified Archiving. We archive all kinds of electronic communication. We archive email, social media, web search, and mobile communication, and it's archived into one central archive. And this archive you can search, perform e-discovery. Like I said, it's a central archive, so it's easy for your administrators to search the entire archive, and your end users can access their own personal archive. And there's built-in e-discovery tools to be able to quickly and easily get to the archive, search it, and export it to prepare for litigation, and also just to manage your data. So Retain has that ability. And then one specific piece of Retain, and since we're talking about mobile communication here, is the mobile archiving piece, or we call it Retain Mobile. And there's three subsets of Retain Mobile. There's the BlackBerry archiving, Android archiving, and archiving for iOS. Let me hit on the Android piece first. So for Android, what we do is there's an app that's installed on the Android device, on each Android device. That app will take all text messages, SMS, and all multimedia messages, MMS, so pictures that are sent, right? It will take those, it will take them off the phone, and it will push it to Retain via the Retain collector is what we like to call it. So it takes it from the phone, pushes it to Retain. Retain takes that and archives it in context. And it does the same for phone call logs. So any logs when people are calling, you'll be able to see who they've called, the duration of the call, the timestamp, etc. So those logs are also archived, and that app does that. And then what's great is that in Retain, the messages are archived in context, meaning if you go back and you want to search for a message, you'll be able to see that message in its context. I was going to see if I had a screen grab of that while we're talking about it. So here's a screen grab of the mobile archive. So you can see here it's got the phone call logs, SMS, MMS, and then it also has some of the BlackBerry Messenger logs here. So back to what I was saying about context. So let's say that I'm texting a customer, and I send them a text, and then they send me one back, and I send them one back, etc. And it goes back and forth, and I have an exchange going on. When you go back to search that archive and you click on a message, it's going to show that entire message string. It's going to show that thread of me sending a text, getting a text back, so that it's in context so that you can see what that conversation was all about. Let me go back here. And so that's one thing that's also great. Then that's unique to Retain, is that we do recreate that message string so that you can understand what is being said in that conversation. And so that's the Android piece. So for Android, there is going to need to be an app installed on each phone for us to be able to pull down those messages into Retain. Okay, next you have BlackBerry. So what we do with BlackBerry is we integrate directly with BlackBerry Enterprise Service. So those of you on BlackBerry, and I know Financial is big on that, so those of you using BlackBerry, there's no need to install an app. All we will do is we talk directly to Bez, and Retain takes that information, those logs in Bez, and brings them to life. We take those logs and we deliver them in a format that's understandable, and that's in context. And the types of messages that can be archived are SMS, MMS, Bbm messages, and PIN messages. Oh, and finally as well, there is also Bbm Protected. Now Bbm Protected, I touched on that a little bit. For that to work, you don't have to have a Bez server. Retain works directly with the Bbm Protected app, and that app can be deployed on Android, iOS, or BlackBerry. And so if you have that app on the phone, the communications are fully encrypted and secure, and then Retain will archive those Bbm Protected messages. And then for iOS, that's what I was talking about with CellTrust. So we all know that Apple has locked down the messaging and locked down iPhones. They haven't released any kind of APIs to be able to archive iMessage, right, or be able to pull down the phone call logs. So to work around that, instead of making your users, maybe tether their phone to a computer and pull all the messages down that way, or sync a device to another system, which a lot of other archives do, we actually have worked with CellTrust to create that separate mobile business number, and that has a separate persona. Let me show you a little graph here, or a little diagram here. So this is an example of how the CellTrust app works. So there's an app that sits on the phone. That app assigns a separate mobile business number to that phone for business communications. That app can be used to call. It can be used to text. And then if a subscriber, a CellTrust subscriber, texts another subscriber, calls another subscriber, that's fully encrypted, and it all goes through the CellTrust server. And then it is, of course, archived in Retain. It's pushed to the Retain archive using the Retain collector from the CellTrust server. Now, if a user, a subscriber to CellTrust, one of your employees is calling a non-subscriber or sending a text, that is sent out through the CellTrust server to the carriers and then to the non-subscriber. And so they're going to see it as a text message, and when they respond, it'll come back to the CellTrust app. And it all goes through the CellTrust server, meaning that everything is archived as well. And that's how it works for iOS, is having that separate app. And if your employees want to bring an Android device and you want to separate it out, using the CellTrust app. It also works on Android. And then let me just show you again this example of how it is archived and retained. As you can see, it's really simple to use. It's easy for a user to access their own archive, and then it's easy for an administrator to search the entire archive and go back and see what communications were being pushed out.
Awesome. That actually brings up another question we get a lot. I mean, the purpose of archiving all this is, well, there's lots of reasons, but whether it's between compliance and audit purposes or litigation, having to pull that up, e-discovery is always a big issue. How does Retain help with e-discovery?
So for e-discovery in particular, there are built-in e-discovery tools. So when you do a search, let's see, I think I have a screen grab of a search. So when you do a search, it's really cool. There's actually, and this is good for anybody who's seen Retain before, this looks a little different, meaning with the upcoming release of Retain, which is Retain 4.0, we've implemented a new search tool. And this search tool is really cool because as you start to type in the search, it's going to give you suggestions of what's in the archive. So as I start to type something in, it's going to say, it'll start to fill that in, kind of like a Google-like search. And it brings in the results really quickly, and you can sort each of these columns. Now, the reason why I'm showing this is that when you do a search, let's say it's for an e-discovery purpose, it's going to bring in all communication. It doesn't matter to Retain what kind of communication it is. It's going to bring it all back in one central search. And you can specify what types of messages you want if you're only looking for certain types of messages. So as you can see, you can put the scope of that, and it will bring back results based on what you've put in there. And what's great is that now you can use Retain for e-discovery. Like we said, you can do a search, a central search, and bring back all the results that pertain to that discovery request. And then from the search, I'm going to go back to this other one so you can see on the screen. From the search, you can place a litigation hold on those messages. You can tag those messages, make them part of, if it's part of an investigation, you could tag every one of those messages and state that it's part of this discovery request. You can forward messages to the appropriate party if needs be. So if you do a search and you want to just forward all those messages on to a legal team, you could. You can export them as well. So you could take that subset. You can do a search, take that subset of the search, and export it to like a PDF and give that to your e-discovery team or present it in court if needs be. Or you can even export to PST if that's what you choose to do. And finally, you can even export to what we call the archive viewer, the standalone archive viewer or publisher. And what the standalone archive viewer does, it's a fully indexed subset of your archive. So you do a search, you export it to that archive viewer, and then it's portable, so you can put it onto a jump drive or a DVD, or even if it's the right size, put it on something in the cloud like Dropbox or Drive, and share that with an outside team so that now they can install that, and it's a client, something that can be installed on a Windows machine, and they can now search through that entire archive. It's fully indexed. They can perform redaction. They can strike out, all directly from that publisher or the standalone archive viewer. So what we've tried to do is incorporate the ability to quickly and easily search your archive, and then have these e-discovery tools like the litigation holds, the export, the tags, directly within the archive, so you don't have to have another solution to be able to perform e-discovery. And even better, with the upcoming release of Retain, we support limited regular expression terms, or regex terms. So if you want to find within the archive a Social Security number or any specific kind of information that might be in there, you can use regular expressions, regex, to be able to find that. So if you're familiar with regex and that's something that you and your company would want to do, that is supported in Retain.
Awesome. We have a question pop up here. Is the metadata attached to the electronic exported items?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. So first, let me just back up a little bit. When everything is archived, All the metadata is archived as well. The metadata is stored in the SQL database, and then the archive is just a partition of a server. And then when it's exported, yes, all the metadata is exported as well, and that applies to the PDF and to the standalone archive viewer. And also PST. Now, the difficulty with PST that we do know, those of you who are familiar with PST files, there is the risk of losing some metadata. That's just the way PST files work. So if you need metadata, make sure that you probably shouldn't be using the PST files. But when it comes to the PDF exports and the standalone archive viewer, yes, all metadata is exported as well. Great question.
Awesome. Let's see. So e-discovery is actually a big. We get a lot of customers come to us and love the powerful e-discovery that's in there. So that's a huge benefit. I guess this brings me to my next question that we get a lot. So, how is Retain different from other archiving solutions? I guess what makes you guys the best, right?
Perfect. Yeah. So the big thing that we like to talk about, let me go back to this other slide here, is this idea of a unified archive. So the first and foremost thing that makes Retain different than other archiving solutions is that we have one central archive for all electronic communication. I stated this a little bit before, but Retain archives multi-platform email. We archive Exchange, Office 365, Gmail, and GroupWise. We also archive social media with Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Yammer. I know I was forgetting one. Yammer. I was looking at the screen there. And then for instant messaging, we archive Google Hangouts, Link, Yahoo IM. Link is now called Skype for Business. We support that as well, and AOL Instant Messenger. And then we also support web searches. So we will archive web searches for Wikipedia, Yahoo, Bing, Google, YouTube. And one thing I failed to mention is for social media and web searches, we also will monitor and filter and block those and alert communications that are going on. So let's say that you have a policy in place that states that your customers can't communicate insider information. Retain the social media portion and the web search portion of it will prevent your employees from posting things to social media or via instant messaging that violates policy. And so there's that monitoring piece in there as well. And then for web searches, if somebody's searching something that violates your policy, Retain can prevent them, can monitor and prevent them from posting things that they shouldn't. And then, of course, it's all archived. So the idea here is that, yes, Retain is different because we monitor and filter social media, instant messaging, and web searches. We archive emails, social media, web searches, and mobile, and we do that all in one central archive that can be easily searched and has those built-in e-discovery tools.
Awesome. That is a good rundown. Let's see. Just have a couple quick last questions here. For those who are on this call who are familiar with Retain, is there anything new coming out?
Yeah, so some of the things, I touched on that a little bit. There is an improved search and a new UI, which you can see here. And then, and that improved search here. So if you've seen Retain before, yeah, it looks a lot different. We've made it so that it's quicker to use, easier to use, a little more streamlined. And then, of course, that search, as I stated, is a Google-like search so that when you start to type in the words, it will give you suggestions on what you could be searching, and it will bring up the results right instantaneously. And then, of course, like I said, there's the regex terms that are supported. And also there's a really cool feature, and that is with Retain Insights. So, and that is there's a thing that we're doing called Retain Insights, which is basically the ability to be able to search other data sources. So I talked about why retain is different. It's because we archive all electronic communication. But we've now gone in and we've created some APIs so that you can search other types of files and whatnot. And let me explain what that means. So if you have like a legacy enterprise content management, an ECM, you can tie to that, and when you do this search, like you see on the screen, you can pull in results from that that ECM that you have. Or let's say you have SharePoint or Dropbox or Novell Filer. If you want to search those, you can use the index that those services have to be able to search them and bring them all into one central set of results. So for those of you who have those kind of solutions like those ECM or other file management systems, you can use Retain to search that, and that's something that's new with Retain that's coming here in the next few months. Oh, and then I did notice, I don't think that it came through to Sheldon, but it did come through that I saw it, and that is going back to cell trust. So the question is cell trust the middle technology piece, i.e. secure means of converting cellular data to IP traffic so it can be archived and retained? Is it also the app that it can install on the mobile devices, iOS and Android? So let me go back to the diagram. It's a good question. So cell trust is both of those. You're right. So cell trust is one. There's a cell trust app. That is the app that goes on the phone that to provide that separate mobile business number. Then that allows people to call or text with that separate assigned mobile business number. And it's a separate phone number completely from the personal number. So that's one is the app. And then two is it is that there's a server, a CellTrust server that's CellTrust host that's in the cloud, and that now takes the data using that app, and it's all routed through the server, the CellTrust server, which is separate from the app, to take that communication, send it out to the carriers, and then also be able to send it to Retain for archiving. So that's exactly how it works. It's the app and it's the middle server piece to be able to push those communications out and archive them.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you saw that. I didn't see that on my chat. So, well, that actually brings us to the big question everybody wants to know, which is what does Retain cost, and is the cost worth it?
Great question. Yes, we get that a lot, and so the easy answer is the cost, it depends, right? It all depends on your organization, how many seats you're doing, what kind of industry you're in. The pricing is based on your needs, and so that's, if you do want to know exactly how it would work for you, we can get you a quote. It's easy to request a quote, a no obligation quote. You can do that via our website, or you can just shoot us an email, and we can get you that quote. But the basic pricing is priced per seat. So however many users you have that you want to archive, that's how it's priced. It's not priced per device, so it doesn't matter how many devices you have. But it does matter how many people will be archiving that. So if, let's take for example, if I have multiple mobile devices that I want archived, that's not going to be an additional cost for each one of those devices. It's just going to be the cost for me as a person, as a seat. So I can have multiple devices, and it's cost per seat. So, and that goes for the email portion, the social media portion, the search portion, mobile portion. It's all based on number of seats. So the pricing is per seat, and then the actual price depends on your organization. And then there's also the ability to deploy this as a cloud solution or as an on-prem solution. And then I know that the other question is the cost worth it? So yes, of course I'm going to say it's worth it, but I'll give you proof behind that yes, and that is what happens if you're involved in e-discovery? How much is it going to cost you if you don't have an archive, and if you don't have Retain specifically with those built-in tools? And then also, how much easier is it going to make the lives of your IT people when they don't have to be bothered all the time to go back and search the archive when your end users can search it themselves? And then how much easier is it going to be for them to manage your systems when they have one central archive to search? So yes, there is a cost associated with it, but it's gonna, it'll save you a lot in the long run, and your total cost of ownership will be lower because you'll be able to easily search. You'll have less of your employees' time searching, and you'll have a quick return on investment.
Awesome, thank you. That actually reminds me of, like I said, that I mentioned at the very start that award that we'd won from Infotech, talking about the best overall value. And that's again a third-party research. And if you're interested in I guess reading that report, you can get that from our website as well. Let's see. Let me look one last time through our chat and Q&A and see if there's any more questions. I think that's it. Q, do you have any last words or anything you'd like to share with everybody?
Yeah, just building on the Infotech thing, I would encourage everyone to go out to our website and view that. So we were awarded the best overall value when it comes to content and email archiving. So, once again, we talked about cost. We did get that award. And so just be aware that is something that you might want to look into and see why we were given that award and see how it can work for you. And we were also named a champion in that same report. So I would encourage you to go out to our website. It's right there on the front page about that. And if you'd like to download that report, please do, and learn more about Retain. And once again, I'd encourage everyone to give us a try. If you obviously are in need of mobile archiving, try it out. You can do a free trial. You can see how it's going to work. Install that app on a few of your devices, or use it via the BES server, and see how it's going to work for you. And start to make sure that you can manage that stuff. I'd just try it out. I know it's something that you can definitely use.
Awesome. It looks like we have one more question that popped up. It's a pricing question. If they're asking if they already have retained email and social for a customer, can I add mobile SMS for free, in quotes, since I've already paid for those seats? Or is the seat bundle price different from each different group of services?
Great question, and I don't think I made that clear, so absolutely. So what we do is there is a base price for Retain, and then each one of the other pieces is a module. So if you have it for email, you paid for the Retain system plus the email module, and that was included. If you want to add on the mobile module, it would be a nominal fee, but it is an additional module that you'd have to add on. And the same goes for search and social. If you want to add those on, it's something you'd add on. But since you've already purchased Retain, it's just a minimal add-on for that, and I could have your Guava representative reach out to you to give you an idea of what that would cost. And you don't have to. Just as a side note, you don't have to buy the mobile piece for every single person that you already have on the email piece. You only have to buy it for those who you're going to archive. So it's not necessarily to archive it or to purchase it for everyone. So just be aware of that as well. But yes, it is going to be a bundle price that would be less if you're purchasing that as another module. And that goes for anyone on this call. If you want to archive mobile messaging today, and then later down the road you want to archive email or social or search, you can add that on, and it can grow with you, and you're not going to have to worry about purchasing a whole other solution. You're just going to have to add that nominal price to add that one module.
Awesome, thank you. I hope that answers your question. If not, like I said, please shoot us an email or we can talk to you offline. Yeah, I think that concludes our mobile device archiving webinar today, and we want to thank everybody for your time and participation. Just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and everyone will receive a link through their email and can view that at their own discretion or pass that along as well. Also, I just want to encourage everyone to visit our YouTube page, youtube.com/GuavaTV, and then you can access other webinars and other videos about Guava and other aspects of Retain if you have more questions or info. I'll look out there as well. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.